Hi friends, glad to be here today. And today I want to continue the conversation that we've been having about boundaries. And more specifically, how do we actually create healthy boundaries in our life and stay true to ourselves? If you've been watching my channel recently, you know that boundaries has been a big subject matter. I've been talking about it quite a bit. I've been talking about self-respect as well as self-esteem and self-worth because this stuff goes hand in hand. And so in this particular video, we're going to actually talk about the creation of healthy boundaries, how to do it, and how to actually keep them solid and strong so that you can actually reaffirm your self-worth. Okay, first off, what are boundaries? Okay, because I think a lot of times we don't really know what a boundary is. It seems kind of scary. It seems like a huge thing, like, we're like, putting a line in the sand and you can't cross there. And for a little bit, it kind of is the line in the sand, but it's more of a proactive stance on setting certain limitations in your life, things that you like, things that you don't like, things that you will accept and things you won't accept. And so a boundary is essentially a limit. It's a limit that we set with other people. It's a limit that we set with ourselves, right? It's stuff that we say that we will accept and things that we say is unacceptable. Acceptable behavior, unacceptable behavior. And these boundaries aren't always with other people. They're also with ourselves. Things that we want to do for ourselves, things that we will not do because we don't want to get in the way of our self-esteem. We don't want to basically walk all over ourselves. So there's certain things that I will not do, okay? And those are my personal boundaries. And then I have boundaries with other people in my life that express how I feel and how I'm living my life and the attitudes and the behavior that I'll accept and won't accept from them. One thing about boundaries is that in order to actually understand what our boundaries are and to know what boundaries that we should create, we must have a healthy sense of our self-esteem and our self-worth, okay? We must actually value ourselves, and we must actually value ourselves in an independent, not codependent way, so it can't be contingent on how other people feel about us or what they say about us. Okay, does that make sense? So essentially what I'm saying is this. In order to create healthy boundaries, we have to understand that we deserve to have boundaries, okay? The second thing is that in order to create healthy boundaries, we have to understand what those boundaries need to be based on how we feel about ourselves, aka our self-worth, right? But when we finally figure out the self-worth component, we have to do these things independently because when you have a high level of self-worth in a positive way, you can't be codependent and have power in your life. You have to be independent in your power. When you come into a couple situation, it's two whole people make two whole people, not two halves make a whole. Okay, that's what we're going for. So we're going for independent self-esteem and self-worth that is determined from you, for you, and not based on what another person feels about you or how they judge you or any of that stuff. So what is self-worth? Okay, self-worth is finding our individual intrinsic value in who we actually are. Okay, it's pretty self-explanatory. It's finding our worth, what we're worth to ourselves. Okay, and before I really pursued my self-worth and figured out any of that stuff, I had a low self-esteem and I had a low self-value, okay, because I didn't know what I was worth. Why? Because I spent more time getting to know other people and what they were about than understanding what made me tick. I would enter relationships and be very codependent and help them do all these different things and get to know what they liked, but I didn't get to take time to figure out, what do I like? What do I not like? What do I want to do in my life? What are my goals and desires? What are the things that I have to do before I die? What's my bucket list? I had to figure out those things, but it took me to realize that I am worthy to figure out those things. Okay? That's a big deal. Oftentimes we don't realize that we're worthy to have these dreams, goals, and desires. We are. And so self-worth is finding that intrinsic value within us, okay? We're all equal. We all have value. We all have something within us that we do better than anybody else on this planet. You got to figure that out. And once you figure that out, you'll begin to see all these different things that you bring value to the table with. And that means something. And when you figure that out, you realize, okay, I'm going to take care of myself physically, emotionally, and mentally. And that begins with seeing my self-worth and creating positive boundaries that allow me to keep my self-esteem and my self-worth, but also allow me to interact with other people. So there's several things that we figure out once we realize our self-worth. Okay, once we realize that we're worthy and that we're worthy of being on this planet and we're worthy of doing these things we want to do, when we figure out that we're worthy, okay, we got the self-worth, we figured out, we eventually realize that we're entitled to certain inalienable rights. Okay, we're entitled to what? We're entitled to think for ourselves. Okay, that's a big deal. We're entitled to have our own thoughts and our own opinions about everything. Okay, and so we don't have to sit there and just take on someone else's thoughts and opinions because they have to be superior. Ours are valuable as well. Another thing that we figure out with the self-worth concepts is that we actually realize that we have an emotional worth. We're allowed to feel the way we feel about people. We're allowed to feel the way we feel about situations, about places, about things. We can have our own feelings, and it's not based on someone else's feelings. I mean, you can have some of the same similar feelings, but you actually respect your feelings, and you respect when you feel that something's good and working for you, and you respect when you feel that something's not good for you, and you actually act upon that instead of being quiet and letting something negative happen or transcend that can actually hurt you. Another thing that we realize when we figure out the self-worth concept is that we actually can command our worth and our value even over our own body and even the space that we feel. And so what I mean by that is that you can dictate who can touch you, who can't touch you, who can hug you, who can kiss you, all those things, because you own your own body. That's yours, okay? Nobody else does. Nobody else owns your body and can tell you what to do, okay? And a good, simple, sweet example, I'm sure some of you have already thought about some different examples, and there are some different examples where people get married and the husband or the spouse thinks that they own the other person, okay? That you know, they have to have sex with them, whatever that looks like. You own your own body. It's up to you. You make those decisions. Nobody should be able to force you into doing something that you don't want to do. A really simple example of this, and something that might actually make you laugh, is I actually have a relative, and I love this person, but they say hi to everybody when you see them with a big hug and a big kiss on the mouth, okay? Not my thing. Okay, not my thing. And it's not like they're just picking me out. I'm not the only one chosen, okay? I'm not the golden child chosen for this. The whole family is, okay? It's just the way, it's their modus operandi. But it makes me feel uncomfortable. And so a while back, I finally had to put my foot down. And it's not that I don't love this person at all, but I said, hey, I'm just going to let you know, I really feel uncomfortable. I'd rather have a hug, you know, a pat on the back. But the kiss on the mouth thing is just a little weird. And it wasn't like tongue or anything like that. It was just too much for a family member, okay? I like my space and I like my personal space, and a hug is awesome. And so we had that conversation. I laid that boundary. And you know what? I think I'm the only one in the family that doesn't get a kiss on the mouth, and I'm happy for it. So there you go. A simple example of a boundary, but it makes me feel better and I don't cringe. Another thing about self-worth is that when we figure out that self-worth, we also realize that we have the ability to choose our friends and our social life. Okay, we're allowed to hang out with our friends. We're allowed to have a good time. And I find that this ends up being one of the first things that goes away in a marriage. Okay, when the couple is together and they're dating and all is fun, it seems like the wife, the husband, you know, two men, two women, whatever, they're allowed to have their friends. Okay, and it's okay. But all of a sudden, when married and you know, everything's kind of ended and they're back at home and it's been a few months after the wedding and, you know, the honeymoon's over, all of a sudden it seems like one person starts putting down some rules about how the other person's not supposed to go out, they're not supposed to see some friends, or these friends aren't good friends and these friends are good friends. And that's an interesting red flag. Okay, because if it wasn't an issue before the actual wedding, I don't know why it's an issue now. And my concern is that I think that everybody needs to have a social outlet. Everybody needs to be able to have their own friends, okay? And needs to be able to talk with their own friends, their own people. And I'm not saying that you're not supposed to talk to your wife or husband, but I think having an outlet and having friends around you is a good thing. And so my concern is that oftentimes when we get into these marriages, we feel as though, okay, well, they don't want me to be friends with them. I'm going to make them happy. I won't go out and hang out with them. I'll stay at home or I'll find other friends. And then eventually over time, that person looks around and realizes their friends have dwindled. That everybody that was their friend, they can't hang out with because their spouse doesn't like them. Okay? And this is a huge red flag, and this is also something that boundaries really helps with, because if boundaries would have been created early on, hey, by the way, we're getting married, and I just want to let you know these friends have been in my life for 25 years, 20 years, whatever. We've been friends since middle school. They're not leaving. If this is a problem, well, this could be a deal breaker. So I want to be able to hang out with my friends, okay? And it's not like you're hanging out with them all the time, okay? It's not like it's an every night thing. But I think this is important because when we start, making decisions like this and getting in the way of our own self-worth, it's a slippery slope effect, and it leads to different things that you're allowing and you're giving away for the relationship. But what is that doing? That's actually taking away from your identity, okay? And also reaffirming in a negative way that your self-worth is less than the other person. Okay, so that's an interesting concept, but if you think about it, it's true. When we start giving somebody an inch and they take a mile, and we don't have much in return to talk about and to see, that directly reflects on the fact that you've given up so much of yourself for the relationship. And oftentimes when we do that, we feel a little insecure, we feel scared, we feel fearful, we feel codependent. And many times that leads to resentment and fear, which leads to a whole nother can of worms that we'll talk about in another video. And last but not least, when we're talking about self-worth, is that we're entitled to have our own spiritual beliefs, okay? I'm allowed to have my own spiritual beliefs. You're allowed to have your own spiritual beliefs. When I'm married, I'm allowed to have mine, and so is my husband. And that's a big thing, and the respect factor as well, okay? The respect factor is a big deal. We might not agree, okay? We might not agree on everything, but I respect the fact that he has these beliefs and he respects the fact that I have these beliefs. And sometimes we can come together and discuss and have good spirited conversations. But I think this is a very powerful thing because I see a lot of people, they automatically convert to another religion, right? Right when they get in the relationship, right when they get married. And there's a lot of things that you need to think about. What are you giving up? What part of your identity are you giving up for this relationship? And is this a healthy thing? Because if you really have solid self-worth and you've done a lot of work and you've really worked on your upbringing and you've worked on your spiritual self and your mental self and your emotional self and you've really actually figured out what's important, I think oftentimes we're good with other people not necessarily agreeing with us, but we're going to stick to at least what we believe in unless we learn something new that augments that belief. And last but not least, if they're still walking all over you, you've created simple boundaries. You've got to follow up with action. You've got to basically train them the way that you want to be treated, okay? Sometimes it takes people 3, 4, 5, 10 times to be trained to understand how you want to be treated, to understand the attitude and the actions that you just will not accept in your life, okay? Some people will push buttons to see how far they can go. Do you understand? And the more they push the buttons and the more lax you become, the more they'll walk all over you. And guess what else? They won't respect you. Okay? And a relationship with no respect is not a relationship. That's nothing. Okay? And if somebody doesn't respect you, you don't want to stay in that relationship because anybody that disrespects you is not worth being in a relationship. And also, you got to sit back and ask yourself, I need to be respected. Why am I not standing up for myself? Do I not respect myself? Okay? Because that's part of it too. Do I not respect myself? And that goes back to self-esteem and self-worth. If we haven't created that, we don't see it, we don't have that, we haven't found that, it's hard to stand up for ourselves because, again, we don't see our value. And big deal, if you don't see your value, others won't either. Okay? Simple. When we walk into a room and we command attention and we feel good and we see our values, other people feel it, okay? When you walk into a room and you're feeling down and you're feeling weak and you're feeling bad, people are going to catch up on that. They're going to feel it, okay? Humans can feel that. When you're feeling that you don't have self-worth and you have a low self-worth, people pick up on that, okay? And I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm just saying it's a big deal because what I've seen is when somebody doesn't respect themselves, how can the other person respect them? It doesn't make any sense. And that's something that's very important. Last but not least, a caveat to think about when we talk about boundaries. It's really hard to go backwards. It's really hard to go backwards. It's so much easier to start a relationship with healthy boundaries. It's so much easier. I know some of you go, well, I know that. That's why I'm having a challenge in my marriage or with my boyfriend or my girlfriend or my coworker, because we've been in this relationship, we've had no boundaries, and now we're having to like create the boundaries right now, and it just seems like we're going nowhere. Okay, so if you're backtracking in a long-term relationship, a marriage, what have you, and you're adding these boundaries, it's going to take time. And it's going to take significant training, okay? And you've got to begin by letting go of the fear that's kept you in this relationship, which I find is probably highly codependent, okay? So if you haven't done the work to locate and see your self-worth, this might be kind of impossible. So first off, we got to do the work to see our self-worth, right? And then we have to be consistent. And even if you've been in a marriage for 10 years and there's been no boundaries, start now. But it's going to take consistency, it's going to take time and effort, it's going to take mutual respect, and also it's really going to take you to know your value, to follow through with what you're saying, and to be positively direct. Most relationships can be salvaged, okay? Most relationships can be salvaged. And so when you think about it that way, most relationships are missing boundaries, and they're missing certain things like this that are essential for mutual respect, that are essential for growth. And so if you're in a relationship right now and you're feeling like you're having to go backtracking to set up these boundaries, that's okay. But you've got to start somewhere. And starting off with simple boundaries, smaller boundaries is very good, and working up from there, okay? And that's a really good thing because it gives you practice makes perfect, right? Anytime that we practice something, we get better and better at it. And when something's a little smaller, it makes it easier for us because we're not really fearing the after effects of the problem, right? We say, okay, we can start here and go from there. So if you're in that situation, start small, work up, and realize that if this is an older relationship, a mature relationship, it's going to take time. And you're going to be consistent. And you're going to have to be consistent because the other person's going to think that that was just a fleeting moment that didn't matter to you, and they can go back to acting the same way they've always acted. And what does that do? It causes resentment, causes anger, causes disrespect, and it probably in the end causes the relationship to ultimately fall apart. So I hope this video has helped you. I hope that this has helped you to really figure out, first off, the self-esteem and the self-worth component, but also how to begin to create these healthy boundaries in your life, and really thinking about being assertive and positively direct, and how that's going to add to your quality of life. And it's going to actually make you feel kind of powerful, and it's going to make you feel a little bit more in charge of your life and of your destiny. If you haven't already, please follow this channel. I really appreciate it. And please share with your friends and family and anybody that you know that's struggling with a relationship that they feel like, well, they're not being respected, or they become a doormat, or they're in a codependent relationship where they don't feel like they have a voice. Because this can really help them to open their eyes and to make some really good changes that can actually fortify them and make them feel better about themselves. And it's always good to help other people grow and learn, because they always remember who shared that with them, and you're always a beacon of light for them, especially in their tough times. Don't forget, create those boundaries, be consistent with love and support, and be positively direct, and continue to live your true life.